You support him for president even if he's convicted in classified documents. You support him for president even though you believe he contributed to an insurrection. You support him for president even though you believe he's lying about the last election. You support him for president even if he's convicted in the Manhattan case. I just want to say the answer to that is yes, correct?
Yeah, me and 51% of America.
You said it would be an honor to be offered a spot on his ticket. Really?
Yeah, I think anyone who's offered the opportunity to serve this country as vice president should be honored. I think the country and the world was a better place when he was president, and I would love to see him return to the White House.
That was New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu and Florida Senator Marco Rubio crowing about Donald Trump after spending quite a while criticizing him. Just a year ago, Governor Sununu wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post slamming Trump for peddling the conspiracy theory that he won the 2020 election and repelling independence. Senator Rubio, meanwhile, called Trump a con man and a fake tough guy. Rubio and Sununu are not alone, and they aren't even among the most egregious in their sudden change of heart. For that, you'd have to look towards former Attorney General Bill Barr. The same Bill Barr who said that Trump's actions on January 6th amounted to a grave wrongdoing. The same Bill Barr who called Trump a consummate narcissist. The same Bill Barr who predicted abuse of power if Trump were to be elected again. That Bill Barr has now endorsed Donald Trump.
I will vote the Republican ticket.
You will.
I will support the Republican ticket. I think the real danger to the country, the real danger to democracy, as I say, is the progressive agenda. And while Trump, and I said, Trump may be playing Russian roulette, but continuation of the Biden administration is national suicide, in my opinion.
Joining me now is McKay Coppin, staff writer at The Atlantic. McKay, I do wonder, what is your reaction to this Bill Barr endorsement of Donald Trump after all that we've heard from the man in the course of the last several years?
It's interesting, right? Because, you know, some of the other clips you showed, Chris Sununu, Marco Rubio, these are Republican politicians who still want to have a future in Republican politics. And so you can kind of understand the craven calculation that they're making, which is, you know, Donald Trump is the leader of our party. He's the most popular Republican in our party. I have to be aligned with him regardless of what I think if I want to keep having a job. Bill Barr is a curious case because, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know what future he has at this point in the party, right? He's not going to run for office. It's unlikely that he would certainly return to a Trump administration. Trump hates him. So what is he doing here? And, you know, I've spent a lot of time writing about, reporting on, thinking about the psychology of these Republicans who understand who Trump is and the threat that he poses and still find themselves supporting him. And I think it's important to understand that it's not always just a simple case of cowardice. I mean, cowardice is kind of woven into the calculation, but it's also, you know, it's something more complicated. I remember talking to Mitt Romney about this, the Utah senator, and he said, you know, when you're as entrenched in a political party as somebody like Bill Barr is, as somebody like Mitt Romney is, you've spent decades making friends, allies, raising money for, getting money from Republican institutions. It's really hard to disentangle yourself from that party apparatus. And turning on Trump in the year 2024, as it was true in 2020 and 2016, it kicks you out of that, your whole social ecosystem. And I think that that's probably part of what's going on with all these Republicans that you just showed. I think that they just don't want to be people without a party, and so they kowtow to Trump, even though they know how dangerous he is.
That's such a brilliant explanation for it, McKay, a very deeply thoughtful one. But I was also struck by the fact that Bill Barr calls a vote for Biden a vote for national suicide. And I wonder from your conversations with Republicans, what lies at the root of that indignation? This idea that the progressive agenda is so suicidal that it trumps, pardon the metaphor, what Bill Barr has outlined are a series of grave concerns about Donald Trump's leadership. I mean, do you have a sense of how Bill Barr justifies this in terms of the others, in terms of the Biden candidacy?
So I don't know what Bill Barr's specific issue is. I think it varies depending on the Republican you talk to, right? So if you are a dyed-in-the-wool social conservative, for example, you might believe that the trade-off in the judiciary, the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade, things like that, are worth kind of making a deal with a kind of, madman, the way that they see Donald Trump as. If you're somebody who is a single issue voter, you're thinking about deregulation, maybe that's your issue. I don't know what Bill Barr's issue is, but I do think that he represents a real phenomenon, which is that I think the way that a lot of these Republicans get to the point where they can get back on board with Trump after saying that he's a threat to democracy, he's a threat to the constitutional order, is by kind of narrowing their view of this race in a way that they think of it as a traditional partisan, party politics election, right? It's a Democrat and a Republican, and I disagree with the Democrats, and everything else aside, the Democratic agenda is bad, and I've spent my entire life, my entire career built around that idea that the Democratic agenda is evil, it's bad, and it's bad for the country. And I think that they kind of rationalize their way into supporting Donald Trump because they go back to thinking about this election as a kind of traditional election, like the elections you had in the 90s or the 80s, right?
But it's not that at all, right? I mean, they may rationalize that the Republican Party, as it is, let's look at Congress, where Mike Johnson is facing ouster for bringing forth a Ukraine funding bill, which in the 90s would have been a no-brainer for the Republican Party. I mean, Trump has just made the party about him, and fealty and loyalty to Trump get you nothing. Mike Johnson was down in Mar-a-Lago kissing the ring last week, and today, Donald Trump really does have an opinion on whether Mike Johnson deserves to keep his job. Is that not a cautionary tale for any of these Republicans?
It's such a good point, and it's the thing that I constantly am bringing up when I talk to Republican leaders, because effectively the deal that Donald Trump has offered Republican politicians is you swear to me your absolute, unvarnished, abject loyalty, often in humiliating ways, and in return, I offer you nothing. Right? Yes. Trump offers no loyalty. There's no, time and time again, he has betrayed, humiliated, ousted, gotten rid of, ended the careers of Republicans who have humiliated themselves sucking up to him. And you would think, we're almost a decade into this phenomenon, you would think by now Republicans would understand that they have no protection, right? But that at the same time, I think that the calculation a lot of them are making is that Donald Trump might not guarantee me anything, but the voters that elect me love Donald Trump, and at the very least, if I'm on board with him, they won't revolt against me right away. And I really think that's the calculation most of them are making. Again, I don't see how that applies to Bill Barr, who is not running for anything, and I would like to see more reporting on what led him to this decision.
Yeah, me too. He's not running for anything, the policy doesn't exist, and the loyalty is non-existent. Okay, Bill. McKay Coppins, thank you for your time, my friend. It's great to see you as always.
Thanks, Alex.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.